Hey, thank you, Mr. Grulich. I'll go to Councilmember Flaherty, our parliamentarian. Do we do reasonable conditions now, and are they the same as amendments or handled the same as?
Yes, we would handle reasonable conditions in the same way as amendments, and whether or not we wanted to ask questions prior to some of those is really up to you as chair. We could take those first. I'll also note that when we had this petition at committee, the petitioner also had a brief presentation. If you would like to entertain that as well, assuming they do tonight.
Do you all have that, Mr. Grulich?
I believe Doug Bruce is here from the petitioner, and I don't know if they do have anything planned, but Mr. Bruce should be able to unmute and respond.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Did you have anything you want to add to the presentation of Mr. Grulich?
I could. We sent in quite a few things since the land use committee. We have made some changes. I sent a PDF document that broke down a few things. So I don't know how you want to handle this, because I know there's some council members that maybe haven't seen this, or again, or do you just want us to answer questions? Do you, because we've changed some impervious numbers and some things, we'll just defer to how you'd like to handle this.
Thank you. We'll just proceed with questions from council members, and we'll start with Councilmember Volan.
Well, I mean, I know that enough has changed since land use committee that I would like to hear a presentation from the petitioner.
Okay, is that the prevailing feeling of council members? Okay, Mr. Bruce, if you're ready, we're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, first, thank you for hearing us this evening. I'll try to keep it brief. I'll go over a few things from last week, and then I'll go over what we have changed, because again, there's some council members that aren't on the land use committee. And I want to thank the Plan Commission and also the Land Use Committee. We took to heart comments that were made, and probably 20 pages worth of notes. And again, it's kind of a quick turnaround to make the requests that they wanted to see additional information or changes that they wanted to see. So as my presentation starts, a few things here. First off, this project, and again, I'm here with Jeff Faneuil from Bynum Faneuil. They're the civil engineers on the project. And Tom Brennan is here also. He's the petitioner and my client. And then his attorney, David Coleman, is also here. So with that, a few things. This site is currently and has been a warehouse that, again, this PUD never envisioned a park being here. This warehouse was built, as a storage and offloading for TVs for RCA and then Thompson. So the PUD doesn't have anything in this PUD that would recognize residential as a use. So what we're trying to do is to take this warehouse, remove it, modify the amendment to allow us, this PUD to allow us to have a residential use here. And then we've worked on this site, as you've seen. It only has one access from Hillside. Currently, there's 5 loading docks off of Hillside where we have semi-truck traffic. And so our thought is to remove the semi-truck traffic, remove this building, and make this not only make the street safer, but to add a life next to this park, meeting a lot of the goals of the 2020 housing study, as well as the UDO, with affordable housing, with green housing, green projects, and make this part of a walkable neighborhood next to the park. A few things here. This is infill development. And as we look at green development and as we want to counter sprawl, this is the type of development that we need. This is certainly not set up to be student housing. This is set up in a place where people can walk to work, families can live next to the park. And again, it's not sprawl. It's taking a site that's underutilized and again needs to, meeting that housing study, we need more density in our city. And there isn't a better place to put that kind of housing in a project than next to one of the largest transportation spines that we have running through our city, which is the Beeline Trail. This is as green as a proposal as you will see. Again, promising to meet LEED Silver and LEED for homes on the townhomes. And I had done some research on this, and I brought this up last week, that currently in Bloomington, there are only 17 LEED certified structures. I did do one of those structures, which is the Crawford Homes on Hillside. And that is a LEED for Homes building with solar panels and LEED construction. Of these 17 buildings, 9 of them are IU, Indiana University projects. So this will add 7 buildings of very green buildings to our inventory of thinking about the future. This is another way, again, to help meet the city's need for more affordability, where we're offering the 15% of the units. And we've gone over, I think there's an amendment for that was the Land Use Committee brought forward last week about meeting the AMI. And again, all of the amendments that have been brought forward for this evening's meeting, as well as the meetings from last week, we've had no argument with, we've not disagreed with, and we've strived to meet all of them. Our development at this site will improve infrastructure in this area. We will also, again, remove the semi-traffic and the loading docks. Let's see what else we have here. Now, some of our changes that have been made through the process of this, Building 7, which is the lot on South Hillside, when we were at the Plan Commission, that was a 5-story building. And as we went through the Plan Commission process, it was pretty evident they wanted to see a step back on the west side of at least 15 feet. So we agreed to that. And then as we went to the Land Use Committee and hearings, it was pretty evident that the building was still too tall for some to be comfortable with. So we removed the entire 5th floor. So that building is you'll see the Plan Commission forwarded on 7-to-1 with a 5-story building and a setback, and now we've moved it to a 4-story building. That's one of the reasons why that site, which currently both these sites together are about 95% impervious. The site on South Hillside, with the story removed, we're really fighting, and we have to keep that site we're asking for an 80% impervious. Because of grade, that site makes sense to build into grade 2 levels of parking. So it's 2 levels of residential and 2 levels of parking. And you'll see, we can answer questions about that, but there's 84 spaces there, 42 spaces per level. Of those 84, 30 of those spaces are leased. 20 of those are leased to Storage Express. 10 of these spaces are leased to the 2 multifamily buildings directly to the west of this, and they will have a door to enter into the parking garage to access those spaces. So they'll have covered spaces where they currently do not. Lots 1, 2, and 3, which are the north side of Hillside, those buildings, what as you've seen by the varying sites, when we first proposed this, we had a turnaround for fire apparatus at roughly the midpoint, which you see tonight. And then after reviewing and looking through comments and looking at the review for the planning department, the consultant for the planning department recommended that maybe that roundabout gets moved to the north end. And we agreed with that. Actually think that makes a better turnaround for everybody using the parking lot to make a turn there and go back out instead of having to back up and turn around in a parking space. We've also, one of the recommendations was to plan this development so that if there were a future development to the north of this site, again, property that we do not own, but if that site were to develop, we could connect to that site. So we've made arrangements on our site plan that we could connect to that site. For that site to also have access to our drive. We've also tried to put this development together. At one point in the history of this site started out as a very dense site. The city of Bloomington had a consultant do a study that was not released that initially showed this to have a few parking structures and heavy density, multi-story buildings. And so years ago, we started out with that sort of development. And when we met with the city, they had kind of had a change of heart and really recommended single family homes. So we pursued about 2 years ago looking at doing single family lots on this site with an alley, not too different than maybe what Matt Press has done over in the Bryant Park neighborhood, just a few blocks away, with narrow alley access and some garages and then some houses that were all along the park. And when we met with the city and presented the administration that proposal, we were told that they had another consultant study that wanted more density here again, not as dense as what we had had before, but that they didn't see just single family homes here because it didn't help solve any of the affordable housing issues, and it didn't add anything to the development there that they saw, what they wanted to see around this new park. So that's when we came up with the compromise of the development that you see before you, which is some multifamily uses, mixed use commercial buildings, and then the townhomes were our idea to come up with a way to provide an affordable housing type that's more affordable than a single family home. And it allows a more compact urban form of its shape and size and density that could be individually owned. So these won't be $300,000 houses along the park on a half-acre lot. These are much smaller townhomes, 3 stories, up to 4 bedrooms each, that can make an affordable way for families to be on the park. And again, kind of act as a way for us to kind of bring the scale of part of the project. The lot that the townhomes are on is roughly twice as big as any of the other lots that we have in our development. So then with that, we came to the meeting last week, and out of that, it seemed that there were some questions and a lot of discussion on impervious surface. And so that's been our change that we have made to what you see before you tonight that Mr. Boland has probably asked to again, have we kind of discuss. And that is that when we put this proposal together, it has been 80% impervious is what we've requested from the day one with the Plan Commission. Again, since it's a PUD, we're kind of right. It's not just normal zoning. I know there's been some confusion with that, I think, in some of the public. This is a PUD, and in a PUD, you write your own rules. Again, the rules that are written right now don't allow us, they only allow industrial use, which obviously doesn't bode well to be next to the park that we would all like to see removed. So in part of this, we had to kind of adopt some of the current zoning standards, like mixed use neighborhood, some different standards. And so that's what we brought forward. And we saw, because our site is at 95% impervious, that we thought 80% was an improvement, again, also to get the density that we needed here. So after last week's meeting, what we've done is we've gone back, and there was quite a bit of input that maybe our drive was too wide. It was 24 feet for two-way traffic. Again, the new UDO allows it to be 20 feet. So we have reduced its width. We reduced the size of the parking, the spaces themselves, which at one time were 18 by 9, and now they're 16.5 by 18.5 for 90-degree parking. And so with this, what it did was it's literally increased our buffer zone, our landscape buffer zone. That would be, landscape on our west property line between us and the existing, I think, 7 or 9 residences that border our west property there. But it also allowed us to rethink how our impervious surface numbers were. So we went through and broke out building footprints, sidewalks, parking, and drives, and made a few changes to the size of a couple of the buildings, a few feet here and there. And so what we are proposing and what you see tonight is lot 1, which is the corner lot with the curved plaza. Again, trying to provide commercial space there for people in the park. So there'll be somewhere between 6,000 to 8,000 commercial space on the first floor and some parking within that building. And then the multifamily above. That has gone from 80%. I think we've got that at 70% in our proposal this evening. Our parking ratio for that with the spaces is 0.50. Lot 2 is the building just north of that building, the other commercial building, multifamily, and we have taken that to 70%. And again, a lot of this is because we've reduced the width of the paved area for parking and drives and a little bit of the slice through the building to bring the building size down. But we can meet 70%. That has a parking ratio of 0.58. And again, that has 12 or 17 spaces inside of the building, and it has roughly a possibility of 1,000 to 2,000 square feet of commercial space on the first floor fronting the park. So the parking won't be visible from the park on either of these two buildings, I might add. Lot 3, which is the townhome buildings. Now, this is a building that takes up more than twice of any of the other lots that we have. And with the townhomes on it, and even, and none of these, if we move the roundabout to the north, if we keep the roundabout where it is, I think we can still keep all of these at the impervious surface numbers I'm giving you this evening, but we can get that to 60%. And that's a number that everybody wanted to try to reach. And here I think we've got it on our largest parcel or lot in this development. Now that has only surface parking, and we have a parking ratio of 0.42, and we have, again, 32 spaces there on surface parking for those 19 townhomes. We can add more parking, but as we add more, we've probably got enough room to add 6 to 8 more spaces, but then it eats into our impervious surface numbers. And then back again, I'll finish with lot 4, building 7, the south hillside that I went over. That one has 84 spaces inside and is at 80% impervious. Another issue with that site is that there is a easement along the east side, and as I'll bring up just because I know it'll be a question that will be asked, that building does not front the park. There is a parcel that the city owns that's wooded currently that's between that site and the park. And then we have a 30-foot easement that's been granted to the warehouse building that's just to the south of us for access to a loading dock that they have. So our 80% impervious in the beginning includes that could be, I mean, it could be all on, but worst case is that there's a 24-foot two-way drive there that's paved. And so we've had to account for that because that could happen down the road. With that really concludes what I have. I would just say this is compact urban form where we want it, and next to the city's largest open space. So we provided a lot of open space, but we've worked with planning where planning had also felt that this isn't an area that needed as much open space as other areas in the city because we're building this next to the largest park in the city. This will add value to the neighbors and a direct way to add new life along this park and remove a large eyesore in a very green way. So with that, I'll conclude. And if Mr. Brennan would like to speak, or we're certainly here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruce. I should say, Mr. Brennan, did you have anything to add briefly?
Well, just briefly, I'd like to say that I really appreciate Doug Bruce and all the effort he's put in. It's been a major effort to put something together that is going to be environmentally great, I think, from what we have currently, which is probably 95% impervious. And to bring these numbers online, I think is terrific. I think that many people have arguably said that my building is the ugliest building in Bloomington. And I pretty much have to agree with them. And I think that what he's put together is, it's an architectural, I think it's brilliant, considering what we have there now and what the potential is with this plan. And I want to thank I'd like to thank the Planning Commission. They've been, Planning Department, City, the Mayor's Office, everybody down the line has been really terrific. And they've offered us suggestions along the way and how we can make this something that would be a wonderfully compatible feature to the park, in addition to the city in general. And the land use committee was very helpful. I think they gave us some worthwhile suggestions on how we can make this something that will be broadly acceptable. And I just want to say, offer my appreciation to all these folks and local people here in this room that have contributed to this effort.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I do believe we are ready for a motion to adopt, starting with reasonable condition number 4. Is that correct? Is that the revised version, or is that what was withdrawn?
So we do have some updated reasonable conditions that went out in a packet addendum, but first we actually do need to vote on and consider the 2 reasonable conditions that were recommended do pass from the Land Use Committee as well. So I see Councilmember Piedmont Smith. If the chair would like to recognize her, I think she would perhaps be the first.
Double check. That was reasonable condition 1 and 3.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Actually, I wanted to ask if I could give a brief report from the Land Use Committee.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So the Land Use Committee did meet twice to discuss this ordinance. And on the March 10th meeting, of course, we got the rundown from Mr. Gerlich from the Planning and Transportation Department. We talked about the configuration of the buildings, the height and the parking, and also the applicable portions of the UDO that should be applied here with the amendment of a PUD. That was then clarified later by Mr. Gerlich, resulting in the increased affordability of the affordable housing component. We did hear at both meetings from Jefferson Shreve or his attorney. He is the owner of the northern 1/3 of the warehouse that is to remain, and he had questions about whether, as far as engineering, it was possible to tear down just 2/3 of the warehouse. And we were assured by the petitioner's engineer that this is feasible, and that if this proposed PUD amendment were approved, those conversations would continue with that owner. We heard from a neighbor about concerns about the density and the effects on stormwater runoff. And then we heard from Andrew Gunther of the Environmental Commission a few times about their opposition on the basis of the 80% impervious surface when the underlying zoning of mixed use medium calls for 60% maximum impervious. Then on the 31st of March, we had another meeting and we started talking about reasonable conditions, which we'll bring forward tonight, some of those. We talked about trying to decrease the paved area north of Hillside Drive by decreasing the size of the actual drive or private street with parking on it, and the size of the roundabout for turning. I think it was very fruitful. Both meetings, I think, resulted in some good changes brought by the petitioner and reasonable conditions to make sure those changes might be implemented. And I think it was a very productive conversation both times. And we have in front of us today a third rendering of the proposed site plan, which reflects some of the changes that Land Use Committee members wish to see. So I think that's it. As was stated by the clerk earlier, the final vote on the petition was 1 yes vote and 3 abstentions. And the abstentions were because there were still some reasonable conditions in the works that those 3 members wanted to make sure were passed before they agreed to the proposal as a whole.
Thank you, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. And I'm sorry, I should have this, but I don't. Who are the authors or sponsors of reasonable condition 1 and 3? Are those what we do need to address those this evening, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
Sorry.
without knowing,
I don't remember.
without knowing that, we'll accept a motion to adopt for reasonable condition 1. Go ahead, Mr. Lucas.
I was just going to say,
I move to adopt reasonable condition 1.
Second.
It is mine. What do you know?
Okay, it's been moved and second. Did you have anything to add, Mr. Lucas?
I was just going to offer to display any of the reasonable conditions if that's helpful for members. They were broken up into the packet that was distributed last Friday and then also the packet addendum that went out just today. So if members are struggling to find them, I'm happy to display any of those if needed.
Okay, I'm seeing none of those requests. So we're prepared. Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Thank you, President Sims. So I am the sponsor of reasonable condition number 1, which was adopted 4-0 by the Land Use Committee. And it states that the primary structure height of the building identified as building 7 on commercial lot 4, which is the lot south of Hillside Drive, shall be limited to 50 feet or 4 stories in height. So I brought this forward due to concerns of the neighbors to the west that wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be a towering structure next to close to their 2-story houses.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to hear from staff.
We certainly don't have any objection to that condition.
Fantastic, thank you. We'll go to council members for questions. Councilmember Volan.
Yes, I have a fire question. Is the height, we're talking about building 7 south of Hillside, and the height of it is 50 feet from street level or 50 feet from the viewpoint of the neighbors on Madison Street? Do we know this?
Maybe Mr. Gerlich can clarify how the 50 feet is measured.
Yep, absolutely. So the UDO, and we actually adopted a new definition of height that allows us to take kind of average grade in. So at the ground level versus where the kind of first floor is, we're allowed to take the average of that. For the most part, the area south of Hillside is completely flat. So that 50 feet would be measured at the base of the building because there's no grade change on that site.
Well, the reason I ask is because I just wanted, like, the minimum operating height of an aerial truck is 50 feet. So at above that, you need an aerial truck to, you know, that's what it works at. But below that, you don't need an aerial truck, which has more, requires more space to spread out and operate. So is there any elevation on this site that's above 50 feet at this point with the adoption of this reasonable condition?
You mean, is there any portion of the building that would be over that?
Of any of the buildings, the whole project, this one included?
Well, the maximum height on all of them, there is a 5-story building that would be 65 feet tall. That's building number 2.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Okay, thank you. But this one is 5 stories, even though it looks like it's sort of raised up above the other buildings.
So building number 7, the council member Piedmont Smith is referring to, would be limited to 4 stories or 50 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I thought Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I was just going to ask the chair if you would like to ask petitioner with regard to the reasonable condition as well, what they thought. I believe they said in their presentation that they didn't object. I don't know if that was to all of them or just some, and this one was one that was discussed, but just thought I'd mention it.
Well, I had assumed it was proper to just ask the staff since they're working in conjunction. And if that is incorrect, then please.
I think it's up to you as chair.
Well, I just thought that was sufficient to ask staff since they're bringing this petition together. So thank you very, very much. Do we have any other questions of this reasonable condition number 1 sponsor from council? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public for public comment on reasonable condition 1 for ordinance 21-07. Please indicate by using the raised hand function on Zoom or sending us a message through chat to our meeting host, Mr. Lucas.
I see 2 hands raised at the moment, and first up is Paul Ash.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Ash. This comments is for reasonable condition number 1 only at this time. We'll comment on the entire ordinance after we get the reasonable conditions. I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay.
So please go ahead.
This is Elizabeth Cox Ash. I'm married to Paul Ash.
All right, I'm sorry.
At any rate, my 4 stories is better than 5, but it is still much too dense. That's all I need to say.
Thank you.
And I believe the other hand was lowered after your reminder that the comment period was on reasonable condition 1. And I don't see any other requests for comments. Okay,
go back to council for any final comments or questions of the author. Reasonable condition 1, ordinance 21-07. Okay, seeing none, can we go to the clerk to please call the roll?
Yes. Let's see. We are on Councilmember Scambaluri.
Yes.
Sims.
Yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Rollo.
Yes.
Volan.
Yes.
And Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And reasonable condition number 1 was adopted 9-0. Can I assume that Councilmember Piedmont Smith, you're the author of reasonable condition 3 as well? I'm sorry, Councilmember Flaherty.
That's me. So I'd like to move that reasonable condition number 3 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. It's been properly moved and second. Please present, Mr. Flaherty.
Sure. And if anyone would like to see it displayed, of course, we have that option. But simply, this reasonable condition requires that the roof of each building meets the cool or vegetated roof standards of the Sustainable Development section of the UDO. Any portions of the roofs that are utilized for solar energy would not be subject to the requirement. And as we discussed at committee, of course, these buildings are already committed to meet LEED Silver designation, but in particular, because that's a point-based system where you're kind of choosing from different categories to meet a certain points threshold. I thought it was important to ensure that we do specifically make sure the roofs are a cool or vegetated roof of some kind, in particular because of the greater impervious surface requirement as compared to other similar base zoning districts like mixed use medium scale or mixed use neighborhood scale. We had this discussion at Land Use Committee, and I believe the petitioners were amenable to the change. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And before we go there, I do again would like to ask staff their input on this.
We don't have any objection to that.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for Councilmember Flaherty for stating that the petitioner was on board as well. Does council members have any questions on reasonable condition number 3 to the author? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the public for public comment on reasonable condition 3 for ordinance 21-07. Please use the raised hand function in chat or send the meeting host a note on raised hand function in Zoom and send the meeting host a message in chat. And say that real fast late at night. And then we'll try to accommodate you as best we can. And after all that, I see none. And I'll go back to council members. Do we have any final comments? Okay, seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on reasonable conditions number 3 for ordinance 21-07?
Yes, council member. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my computer here. Maybe a lot of trouble. Council member Sims?
Yes.
Flaherty? Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Volan?
Yes.
Rosenbarger? I'm sorry, I lost you on that one.
We still can't hear you, Councilmember Rosenbarger.
I don't know why. Yes.
Yeah, okay, we heard you that time. Thank you.
Heard you that time, yes, thank you. And Scambolari?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Reasonable condition number 3 is adopted 9-0. Councilmember Flaherty, with reasonable condition number 4 that was withdrawn, this is now a revision. And okay, please proceed.
Yes, I'd like to move that we adopt reasonable condition number 4 revised.
Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved in second. Would you care to present?
Sure. So the revision was a minor one, just to clarify some language based on some perceived ambiguity on the part of Councilmember Piedmont Smith. The reasonable condition is meant to help address the requirement in the UDO that we have greater internal connectivity and connectivity to surrounding developments than would be required by the UDO. That's a bit of a tricky prospect for this petition as a whole because there isn't a whole lot of connectivity to other sites. But in looking at the Beeline as the frontage for the property, if we were thinking about if this was on a street, for instance, I think we would want to see that each building would connect directly to the sidewalk or to the sidewalk in front of the street. So the motivation here was to make sure that we have direct connections from each of the townhome buildings, as opposed to a single shared connection for a few of them to the Beeline Trail. So it adds a few pedestrian connections from the building fronts to the trail, and that is it. And sorry, one more note. This is reflected in the updated site plan that is part of the packet addendum from the petitioner. So they have incorporated it visually there as well.
Thank you. Again, we will go to council members for any questions of the author of reasonable condition number 4 as revised. Okay, I do have a question. You said the rendering that we saw, it does show that there is an individual walkway from each townhome entry as opposed to the shared walkways.
Yes, that's correct. I think the shared walkways still exist as well because they are for units that don't front on the Beeline, that sort of have a central courtyard aspect and then would go to the Beeline from there. But the units that front on the Beeline have a direct connection.
Okay, and without going to staff, you said they are amenable to this reasonable condition.
Based on our conversation last week, I believe so, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the public for public comment on reasonable condition number 4 as revised for ordinance 21-07. We would ask that you use the raised hand function in Zoom to indicate your intent to public comment, or you could send our meeting host a message on chat to indicate the same. Seeing none, Mr. Lucas?
Don't see any.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll go back to council for any final comments to the author or on this reasonable condition number 4 as revised. Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Flaherty?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Volan?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
And Sims?
Yes, and reasonable condition number 4 as revised for ordinance 21-07 is adopted 9-0. I believe Council Member Flaherty or reason. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Council Member Flaherty.
Yes, I'd like to move that we adopt reasonable condition number 5 to ordinance 21-07.
Second.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll, please? I'm sorry. I do apologize. Will you care to present, Mr. Flaherty?
Yes, Mr. President. So this reasonable condition memorializes commitments that the petitioner has agreed to in previous committee meetings to offer the affordable units in the multifamily and townhouse buildings at an income level that is 10% lower of an AMI than would be required by the UDO in the affordability incentives. So in particular, the UDO, to take advantage of housing affordability incentives, has 120% AMI threshold, and the sections on PUD amendments require that the affordability component go above and beyond that. So we clarified that that would be a 110% AMI max for the affordable units. And because that wasn't included previously in the report from Plan Commission or other materials submitted by petitioner, staff thought the best approach was to memorialize this in form of a reasonable condition at this point. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Go to our council members who have any questions to Councilmember Flaherty. Councilmember Volan.
Yes, could the petitioner respond to the proposal?
Sure he could if he chooses to. Mr. Gerlich.
Well, I can certainly, I guess, answer for staff. But I think that Councilmember Volan was hoping to hear from Mr. Bruce on that.
Did you want staff?
We don't have any objections.
No, I'm just sorry. You want staff or petitioner, Councilmember Volan?
I asked for the petitioner.
I'm sorry. I thought I heard staff. Thank you. Mr. Bruce, would you care to respond?
Yes, we when it was brought up last week, we did not have a problem with that and have agreed to meet that condition, that reasonable condition.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else, Councilmember Volan? Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council members? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the public for any public comment on reasonable condition number 5 of ordinance 21-07. Please use the raised hand function on Zoom or send the meeting host a note through chat if you desire to speak publicly. Okay.
I do have one comment if you just, I could just have one moment.
Yes.
The comment comes from Dave Askins with the B Square Beacon. Mr. Askins says, a question about the wording and the calculations involved with the affordable housing incentives. Tonight's reasonable condition cites the same wording as the UDO, quote, limiting incomes to at least 10% lower AMI levels than would have been required to earn a tier 1 or tier 2 incentive, end quote. At the Land Use Committee meeting, Councilmember Flaherty mentioned 108% AMI as the resulting AMI number. That's what you get if you take 10% of 120, which is 12, and then subtract 12 from 120% AMI to get 108% AMI. Tonight's interpretation is to interpret 10% in this context as 10 percentage points. That is, you'd say the AMI level has to be 10 points lower than 120, which is 110. 110% AMI versus 108% AMI could translate into a meaningful difference. What's the reason for one interpretation over the other? And that is the end of the comment. And I don't have any other requests.
I'm sorry.
Comment at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I was muted. So having seeing no more public comments, we'll go back to council on final comments or questions for reasonable condition number 5 on ordinance 21-07. If I may, I will ask Councilmember Flaherty can you expound on the public comment?
Sure, of course. Yeah, and that's an astute observation. We had discussed 108% AMI initially at Land Use Committee. And yes, that would be arrived at by taking 10% of 120 and subtracting it. But I believe city staff and council staff consulted with city legal, and to me, and the latter interpretation prevailed. And to me, upon revisiting the language of the UDO, I agree with that. It says limiting incomes to at least 10% lower AMI level. So when we talk about AMI levels in percentage points, I think 10% lower level from 120 would be 110%. So that was the legal interpretation from city legal staff. It makes sense to me as the most reasonable interpretation of the plain language of the UDO. So that's why this reasonable condition reflects that number.
I'm sorry, I made it. Thank you. And I think I just understood what you just said, but if we start with 120% and then 10% less than that, would that not be 12%
right.
less as opposed to 10% less?
If you're saying 10% reduction from 120, yes, that would be true. But the wording of the UDO says limiting incomes to at least 10% lower AMI level than would have been required. And I think it's that description of a percent of AMI level, if you said it. So yeah, it's not relative to the 120. It's just a percent of AMI is what it's relative to. So a 10% lower level is just 10% lower AMI level than 120. So 120 down to 110. Sorry, I know it's a bit confusing, but again, that's city legal's interpretation, which I feel confident in.
Hey, thank you. Further comments from council members? Okay. Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll of reasonable condition number 5 for ordinance 21-07?
Yes. Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rollo?
Yes.
Volan?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
And Flaherty?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Reasonable condition number 5 for ordinance 21-07 was adopted 9-0. Reasonable condition number 6. Author, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I move reasonable condition number 6 to ordinance 21-07.
Second.
Thank you. It's been probably moved to second. Will the clerk please call the roll? do apologize. Council members Piedmont Smith, would you care to present?
Yes, thank you. So this reasonable condition is just to ensure that all the affordable priced units are not placed in the same area in the development, so that they are spread out, so that we don't have a low income area or low income wing, so that we have them interspersed with the market rate units, both in the multifamily houses and in the townhouse buildings.
Okay, thank you very much for that. In your discussion with staff, what is this acceptable to them?
I don't know.
Or should I ask staff? I'm sorry, I do apologize.
Yes, we're certainly acceptable to that. You know, this was something that the petitioner had already said and stated in their petitioner statement, is that each building would have 15% of the units set aside in there. So I just want to clarify that for this, you know, the townhomes, you know, those are looked at as 19 whole units. So out of those 19 units, 15% of those 19. So it's not 15% in each townhome building per se, but out of the 4 townhomes, out of those 19 units, 15% of those would be set aside, 15% of the units in building 2, 15% of the units in building 1, and 15% of the units in building 7 would be set aside.
Thank you very much. Sounds very reasonable, no pun intended. Do we have any other comments or questions from council members? Seeing none, we'll go to the public for public comment. If any, please use the raised hand function in Zoom, or you can send a message to our meeting host via chat. And Mr. Lucas, I see one hand.
Yes, and I'm not sure if this is actually Paul Ash, but it's the screen name Paul Ash, and they should now be able to unmute.
This is Elizabeth Cox Ash, and this is reasonable because you don't want a Cabrini Green sort of situation like what happened in Chicago, where everything was all in one unit or another unit or another unit. Affordability is far more effective if it's spread out. This is why BRI used the same model when we did our affordable housing program. We interspersed it within market value houses within the housing units in the core neighborhoods. This is far more effective. So that's all I need to say.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else, Mr. Lucas?
Not that I see, no.
Okay, seeing none, we'll return to council for any final comments or questions. Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on reasonable condition number 6 for ordinance 21-07?
Yes, Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
Volan.
Yes.
Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Scambaluri.
Yes.
Sims.
Yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
And Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And reasonable condition number 6 for ordinance 21-07 was adopted 9-0. We'll move on to reasonable condition number 7. Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, I move that reasonable condition number 7 to ordinance 2107 be adopted.
Second.
Okay,
it's been moved in second. Would you care to present, sir?
Yes, this reasonable condition commits to decoupling the pricing of parking from the price of rent. This is something we've seen with some previous PUDs in the last year or two. It is brought to help better align the project with our comprehensive plan goals, focusing on efficiency with parking and with incentivizing sustainable modes of transportation. In particular, decoupling the parking of pricing from, the pricing of parking from the price of rent is a form of transportation demand management. It helps to incentivize modes such as transit and walking and bicycling by removing a cross subsidy from those users to others and making sure that those who choose to use transit or walk for transportation are not paying extra, so to speak, for a parking space they don't need. So it allows the parking needs to match those of the particular tenant instead of mandating their inclusion. Happy to answer any questions on that.
Thank you. First question I'll ask is of staff or petitioner, their input on reasonable condition 7.
Again, we don't have any problem with that, and I don't think the petitioner does either. Given that there's only 0.5 parking spaces per bedroom, they can't couple them together anyway because there's just not enough to even go around for that. But we certainly don't have a problem with that.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to check with staff. It's what I thought I'd heard debated in the land use committee. Council members, do we have anyone that have any comments or questions of Councilmember Flaherty? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. So this does not apply to the townhomes, which are slated to be owner occupied. Is that right?
I intended it to apply to all parking, including owner occupied parking. I think as drafted, that's how I would interpret it, is applying to everywhere.
But it says, and not include parking spaces in rent, and if they're not paying
that's
rent.
correct. Good point. Sorry, I was slow on that.
Yes.
That's an oversight on my part. I guess I'm curious if the petitioner would like to weigh in on whether they had any intentions with regard to owner-occupied units versus rental units, in particular the townhomes. Or staff as well, if either would like to weigh in.
Staff certainly doesn't have any objection to tying it to the townhomes, but again, you should just verify that with the petitioner.
Okay, we're not hearing from the petitioner. Go ahead, Mr. Bruce.
Jeff, you want to?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Have an objection to this reasonable condition.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, did I hear no objection?
No objection.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other comment from council members? Councilmember Flaherty.
Sorry, I was hoping the petitioner could clarify if they were opposed to amending an amendment to this reasonable condition to clarify that it would apply to the whole site, including townhomes. As written right now, it specifies not including parking spaces in rent. So sort of by default, that would only apply to rental units, but it could be modified and revisited perhaps after we consider the next reasonable condition to address all homes, which is actually what my intent was. So I guess if the petitioner could weigh in on that question specifically, that would be helpful.
This is Jeff Fania. We don't object to it applying to all units in the unit.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I have a question, if I may, and this is probably to the petitioner. How would that, the price of a townhome for sale, how would that be calculated if in fact you decoupled parking or added parking? So what is the price for that unit with parking and without parking? I guess that's a lot clearer for me in my mind. Do we have those calculations?
This is Jeff Fania again. We do not. We're only into, I'll say, schematic and the design development phase of our design services. And until we get further into construction documents, we won't have any pricing for either the for sale units or the rental units. So I'll have to comment at a later time.
Okay, is it fair to say that the decoupling amount for rental units will be exact or close to the same for townhome units for the price of parking as far as decoupling?
Parking, the parking costs would be the same for both the townhomes and the rental units.
Okay, and those costs would be subtracted from renters in a townhome. I'm sorry, for non-vehicle needs in a townhome, the same as is a rental unit.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any other comments from council? Okay, we'll move to.
If I could just, I've just been sitting here kind of thinking about that, and while I certainly understand the intention, I guess I want to be careful a little bit, you know, with the townhomes, as those would be owner occupied. You know, there could be a situation where they want to set this up where they sell a unit and the person owns a parking space that goes with that. So that might be advantageous to helping increase the owner occupancy and sellability of the townhomes. So I just wanted to throw that out there for Councilmember Flaherty if he wanted to propose something that might still allow for a parking space to be sold with a townhome unit.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting question in that it's the same basic issue of sort of requiring everyone to meet the same system, whether or not they need it. I think actually by removing the clause from this reasonable condition, just saying the developer shall record a written commitment to offer on-site parking only a la carte, I think that accomplishes the change. And it just says that, I mean, basically parking is just rented separately. No purchased unit comes with the space automatically, and you just you rent your parking space separately.
Okay, can I ask a question? So if I bought a townhome, I'd have to rent a parking space or two if I own two vehicles. I'm not so sure how this works together with regard to purchase of townhomes. I get it with the rental units.
I guess, well, yes, that would be the case. I mean, you're in theory always paying for the parking space. It's just, it's included automatically, so you don't see it. This is decoupling it, so it's just you see that price separately. But I don't know, I guess another relevant question for the petitioner is, there are 19 townhome units. We just discussed how there are only 0.5 spaces per bedroom for the site. Did they have, I mean, prior to the discussion of this reasonable condition, did they have a particular plan in mind for selling you know, every townhome unit with one parking space exactly and the option to rent more, or is that something that the petitioner has not gotten to yet in planning stages?
Matt, can you hear me?
Yes.
So, you know, we've had some of these discussions, and what we were saying here is that decoupling it, if you were to buy a townhome, it just means that you could buy a parking space or not. It would be separate, so they would be decoupled. So hopefully not everyone wants a parking space, or those are 4-bedroom units. You know, we only have in that area for that lot 3, we have a total of 32 parking spaces, and we have 76 bedrooms. So we have 19 units, so there would be a parking space, but it would be decoupled. You could buy the unit. If you want the parking, you can buy a parking space.
Got it. So you'd actually purchase the space as opposed to renting it.
That's right. Or do you rent the, you know, again, we haven't discussed it, but I suppose you could rent the space and then if you found that you didn't need the space anymore because you were walking to work, then you wouldn't have to have the space anymore. So it's not, we haven't gotten down that road of discussion, but to me, it seems like the decoupling allowed us that flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, earlier this evening, a member of the public reminded us to be consistent in applying our rules of civility. So I would like to ask Mr. Bruce to kindly address council members as council member, whatever the last name is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. Councilmember Volan.
Yeah, Councilmember Flaherty, I just wanted to sort of ask a clarifying question. Is it safe to say that with this reasonable condition, it's better to say that the owner of a townhome has basically, I think the petitioner can develop it any way they want to, but the townhome owner has the right to buy a permit, half a permit for every bedroom, rather than right to a guaranteed reserved space. And that, however the petitioner wants to manage the spaces, if they want to guarantee a space to every bedroom, that's that many fewer spaces that the non-owners, the renters in other apartments have access to, but it's entirely up to the petitioner how they want to allocate these spaces. Is that a good way of characterizing the idea here?
Sure, I think that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments or questions from council? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment on reasonable condition 7 on ordinance 21-07. Please use the raise hand function in Zoom or send the meeting host a notice through chat so we can accommodate you. I see one, Mr. Lucas, from the screen of Paul Ash, but we don't know who it is. So can
maybe you? Elizabeth Cox Ash, and they should be able to unmute.
Yes, this is Elizabeth Cox Ash. This is concerning the density issue and the parking issue. You remember Mr. Schott earlier this meeting showed a picture of West 6th Street where it showed a house or a car passing through 2 parked cars. West 6th Street is much wider than West Hillside Street. West Hillside is literally 2 cars wide. So no matter, you can't have any parking on West Hillside or it blocks a lane. What West 6th Street would be South Madison. This whole density issue does not address the parking. No matter what, you're not going to have enough parking. And so even if you say, okay, you could buy a parking space, you're going to have problems with parking along South Madison. No matter how you look at it, it's going to be parked up, and then you're going to have traffic issues. In banking, there was a term. It was called blue sky. Blue sky means you don't know what is going to be put in. So I'm sorry, Mr. Bruce, I know you are very accomplished as, an architect, but you really have no idea what the density will be on this project and how it will actually affect those who are residing there. There's also an issue of move-in day with whoever's purchasing your 19 townhomes or moving into your affordable units or your rental units. How's this going to be handled? Because I don't know any other way of furniture getting into these places without trucks. And when you're talking about an already dense situation, how's this going to work out? Are you going to rent cranes to get people's furniture in? I just don't see how this is far too dense for what it is. That's it.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else, Mr. Lucas?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back to council for any final comments. Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, I'd actually like to move to amend reasonable condition 7 to remove the clause at the end of the sentence. And I believe Mr. Lucas has that edit ready to display. I need a second as well, of course.
Second.
Thank
you. Is the display coming?
Yes.
Thank you.
Please.
So as stated, the clause regarding making the specific reference to rent is removed, simplifying the reasonable condition in line with the discussion we just had.
Okay, so I guess my question is how that has been amended. How do we handle that?
We need
is that a separate?
Sorry, yeah, we need to vote on the amendment, and if the amendment is adopted, we would then vote on the reasonable condition as amended. And if
okay, did you offer a motion to,
oh, sorry.
Oh, you know, you did, and I just seconded.
Yes,
okay, seconded for discussion. Okay. Do we have any council members have any questions for Councilmember Flaherty? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I was wondering whether we couldn't just accept the amendment to the reasonable condition by unanimous consent.
I think up to the chair, but I think that would be appropriate. If there are no objections, we could consider.
What does unanimous consent mean? 100% in this particular case of council's vote? Yes.
It means there's no objections.
Well, I'm still not clear on decoupling it from the townhome section that has been purchased. And even if it is decoupled, there's been no real thought on it to what that means from a cost-effective standpoint. So I understand the intent and I can see it working in the future, but tonight I'm just not comfortable with that because I don't know really what I'm voting on other than car spaces at this point, and I don't even know where they go in my own mind. So I guess that precludes a consensual vote based on that. So parliamentarian, how do we proceed now?
Yes, we would, I guess, go to public comment on the amendment to the reasonable condition, and then any questions or comments and vote on the amendment to the reasonable condition.
Even with your revision as amended? I mean, because you struck the last sentence, but if we don't have consensus, then now what?
We would vote on the amendment and see if if there's a majority that supports the amendment to the reasonable condition. So that was a motion that's on the table. I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, before we go to public, do we have any comments from council? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Well, you asked for comments, so I have a comment, not a question.
That's fine. Thank you.
It just in my view, we can leave open-ended the question of how this applies to the townhomes. That can be up to the developer whether they want to sell one parking space with each townhome, or whether they want to just offer parking spaces for rent for people who buy the townhomes. I don't see that as needing to be resolved at this point. I think that the main thrust of this reasonable condition is just to say, look, let's externalize the cost of that parking because not everybody needs it. And we should encourage people to look at the external costs of parking and consider that when they're making their decision about transportation. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. And for some reason, that was much, much clearer the second time. No disrespect, Councilmember Flaherty, with how it'll be handled in the future. So can we accept consensus agreement on this revision? Is that proper, Mr. Parliamentarian?
If no one objects, I would be happy to, yes.
Okay, and I see no objections. Okay, so where am I? We're at the public comment, then back, and then vote. Okay. Do we have any comment from the public on reasonable condition number 7 as revised with the last sentence stricken? And if you do, please use the raise hand function in Zoom and or send a message to our meeting host through chat. Okay, seeing none, we'll come back to council for any comments, final comments. Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on reasonable condition number 7 as revised?
Yes. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
Volin.
Yes.
Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Scambolari.
Yes.
Sims.
Yes.
Flaherty. Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
And Smith.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. And reasonable condition number 7 as revised was adopted 9-0. Now we move on to reasonable condition number 8, sponsored by Council Members Piedmont Smith and Councilmember Flaherty.
I move reasonable condition 8 to ordinance 2107.
Second.
Thank you. It's been properly moved in second. Would one or both prefer to present? Let's start with Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Sure, I'm already unmuted. Yes, so there have been different site plans through the course of discussions on this proposal, and this reasonable condition just makes it clear that what we would like to see is the most recent site plan that was submitted today and is part of the addendum to our council packet tonight. So this one moved the roundabout to the north end of the site. It shifted the angle from perpendicular to angled parking spaces, and it increased the size of the buffer yards. So this is just to clarify that that is the one that we are accepting.
Okay, thank you. Any input, Councilmember Flaherty?
Nope, I think that's covered it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from council members? Seeing none, Mr. Grulich, what is staff's input, please?
So I did have a chance to talk to the fire department today, and they were not supportive of the revision that moved the roundabout to the north side of the site. Tim Clapp expressed concerns with that decreasing their mobility on the site. If there was an emergency on the site and a fire truck, ladder truck or something set up on the south side of the site, it would block basically any mobility or anywhere that it was parked. And so the roundabout increased the ability for the fire department and emergency services to move through the site. So they did express concern with the roundabout at the north side of the site. So I wanted to make sure to relay that.
Okay, thank you. I do have a question for the petitioners. In the presentation earlier, I thought there was an agreement on the roundabout as remodified and sidewalk space, and I thought there was an agreement on that. Is that not true? That the roundabout had been revised from the earlier rendition. Is that, am I confused on that?
I can answer. So we've kind of gone back and forth because trying to work with the fire department and fire department apparatus turning radiuses. So we have not changed the actual size of the roundabout, but we've changed its location. Initially, after last week, we decided to move it to the north end, but in discussions with Mr. Clapp, Tim Clapp of the fire department, he had expressed to the planning department that it gets moved back to this location about the midpoint. We ran impervious surface numbers, and because we've narrowed the drive to 20 feet and from 24, and if we go with 90-degree parking, our impervious surface numbers are down, and it won't affect, we could have this roundabout at the north end or in the middle. We just need to get complete confirmation on where it needs to go. I'm in agreement with Councilmember Piedmont that we have the 90-degree parking as opposed to the angled parking because we gain a larger buffer yard. But the exact location of this, ideally, we would like to have it on the north end because it serves as a turnaround for all traffic, not just fire traffic. And Mr. Fanio, our civil engineer, had done a drawing showing that in the size, the 45-foot diameter that we currently have as a roundabout, that you can do the 3-point turn and the fire vehicles could turn around. But that's not something that's pleasing to Mr. Clapp right now. So Eric Grulich and I of the planning department discussed that would be something that we could work out later with planning and the fire department. We're agreeable to wherever you would like to have it. But I think part of me says this current site that gives us the best impervious and best landscape buffer yard is the 90-degree parking, which I think the council members that have sponsored this reasonable condition, I think that's what they were looking for. I'm not sure. The size of the roundabout has not changed.
Member Piedmont Smith.
No, actually the reasonable condition describes the latest site plan with angled parking. So Mr. Yes. Bruce, are you saying that if the roundabout were moved back to the middle of the site, you could not have angled parking?
Yes, so the issue is that with the roundabout at the north end, the angled parking works because you could have angled parking. It almost serves as a two-way street. As you're driving northbound, you could pull into an angled parking spot. You can back out, and then you would drive up to the roundabout, make your turn, and then as you drive southbound, there'll be angled parking that you could also park in or back out and continue southbound. If we don't have the roundabout at the very north end of this, and it's in the middle, then the angled parking does not work. Because as you could imagine, someone trying to pull in and park, and now if they're beyond the roundabout, then they have to back the 20-foot narrow drive. They have to back more than 90. It's a really difficult swing. I think you'd be hitting cars on the other side of the street. We drew both of them, and also the angled parking spaces take up more area, so they are wider per the UDO. They take up more room, so we end up increasing our impervious surface. So the 90-degree is the best way to achieve the new impervious surface numbers that we have, because our spaces now are only need to be 8.5 wide by 16.5 foot deep. Where the old UDO, if you were a 90-degree parking, you were 9 foot wide by 18 feet deep. So we've saved some width there that we could apply to the buffer yard.
So I'm a little confused because the most recent documents that you relayed to us today had a site plan with angled parking, and it had the reduced impervious surface. So are you saying that the reduced impervious surface does not come about with the angled parking? It comes about with perpendicular parking?
What's that?
The angled parking still reduces the impervious surface.
Okay, so yeah, so Jeff, so Mr. Fanio is saying our I think we're the same on the impervious surface. I think the discussion that I had with planning was at the end of the day. I received a call from Mr. Grulich at almost 5 o'clock that said his discussion with Mr. Clapp was going to move the roundabout back to where we had it. And so I think that's probably the confusion, because that happened at 5 o'clock and I'd already sent out this drawing earlier today.
Based on angle, not perpendicular.
That's right. And the calculations were based on angle. And then I when I moved it, I think did we have the?
We didn't recalculate it with 90 degrees.
Yeah, we didn't have it completely recalculated to the 90 degree. So.
But we know it's less.
Yeah. We know it's less and awful close, but that happened at literally 4:55 because the discussion happened between planning and the fire department. So we didn't do another drawing because that was literally 5 minutes before my staff was leaving, and so we were trying to run some numbers rather quickly. Ideally, what you have in front of you that we submitted this morning is what we would love to have, but we don't believe that the fire officials are going to approve that. And Mr. Grulich made a comment when we spoke at a little after 5 that, maybe this could be something that staff could have the responsibility to work on with us and the fire officials to come to an agreement on where this needs to go. We've seen some different codes and some different building codes and some of the fire codes are always open to interpretation. And I think there's some different interpretations of this. The one code says the fire apparatus cannot back up more than 150 feet. But will that apply if we have a turnaround at the north end? Then they don't need to back up. If the roundabout is at the very north end, there's no backing up 150 feet. So we still see that it can work at the north end, but we haven't convinced Mr. Clapp of that.
Point of order. Mr. President, may I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Would the authors of the reasonable condition number 8 make a change that the council prefers the modified preliminary plan instead of approves of the modified preliminary plan, to leave it open for the staff to negotiate a way forward in the interests of safety, it seems?
Councilmember Flaherty or Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes, if Councilmember Piedmont Smith's in agreement, I'm happy to just withdraw this reasonable condition from consideration, given the fact that the petitioners have stated this is their preference, but that they're still working on some details of it.
Point of order.
And yes, Councilmember Vola.
I mean, the problem is that the very idea of a reasonable condition is essentially a requirement, and that without the condition, we can't compel, like if we're just talking about preferences, then Mr. Flaherty's right. We might as well not bother. So, I mean, this is our opportunity to ensure that something must get done instead of may get done. Just a thought.
I still think it's useful to state preference.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
I would be in favor of withdrawing the amendment and letting the petitioner and staff and the fire department work on what is the best plan. I am disappointed that we can't do the angled parking if the fire department insists that the roundabout needs to be at the center of the site, but we need to follow the fire department rules.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty, what is the process? You just withdraw it and that is now off the board, reasonable condition 8? It's just that
technically
simple.
It was a motion on the table, so if there was an objection to the withdrawal, we would need to vote on it, but if there's no objection by unanimous consent, yes, we can withdraw it. Consider
Do we have any Councilmember Vola?
I object to the withdrawal. I have a comment to make.
Thank you. Go ahead, please make a comment.
It's been a hectic day, as Mr. Bruce has said. I actually have been in contact with, I spoke with the fire chief today about topics like this, including this particular project. One thing he told me was that the roundabout on the north end, even at the north end with a 3-story building, because it's the only access to the building, it still might require an aerial truck to reach the far end on the park side. If there's a fire on that side of the building is unstable. So, now, what Mr. Clapp was suggesting and what this illustration there was an illustration that showed that we might eliminate the center of the roundabout in order to allow trucks to make a 3-point turn, which would make it even less environmentally sensitive. But the chief has said to me that he has made it a point to try to purchase vehicles that have tighter turning radiuses to reduce the need for impervious surface that would require this kind of big turnaround. And while he couldn't, because, you know, like the details of the project are still up in the air, while he couldn't commit to anything because Mr. Clapp's job is difficult. Like, you know, if you don't deal with it beforehand, once it's built, it's built. So, you know, he has to hold out for the most stringent possible thing. But, you know, the chief's actions over the past several years have been trying to mitigate this problem. So, like, I'm a little loath to give up on the idea that we might be able to commit to this configuration. I mean, I'm okay with allowing the fire department, the planning, and the petitioner to negotiate. I mean, the chief even suggested permeable parking spaces. So that would even further improve this, you know, design. And if we have angled spaces, and again, my understanding is angled spaces reduce the impervious surface. There's a lot of wins to be had here. So, you know, like, I wish that we could do something more here. And if we still have to withdraw this because we can't decide it tonight, I understand that. But, you know, again, Mr. Clapp has to, by the nature of his job, go with the strictest possible interpretation. And I don't know that we even have trucks anymore that require these kinds of radiuses or this kind of turnaround. So I'd like to find out for sure, you know, how the department would actually handle it in operations. So that's my thought. I wanted to make sure that was known to everyone, that, you know, the chief is interested in this and wants to work on it as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Voland. I think, well, any more comments? Councilmember Rollo.
Well, what Councilmember Voland just described can't be resolved tonight, right? But we could state a preference. We could state a preference, and our preference is for the roundabout in the north end with the angled parking. So we could possibly do that, which might have an effect on the outcome.
I have to agree with Councilmember Rollo here.
Yes,
it's better than nothing.
As long as it.
If the sponsors would like to do that, if they want to withdraw, then it's their amendment.
Well, actually, it wasn't unanimous. I'm sorry, unanimous consent. So I don't know if we can withdraw. We might have to vote on it. My comment is it's a safety factor. And I've said on the board of public safety, and I understand that. We've had the same conversation with traffic calming issues and some other situations. And that truck has to get around from a safety standpoint. I heard in the land use committee, well, it might only come once or twice a year or something, I don't know. Well, that's the times that I'm concerned about, but that's just me on the total radius for all vehicles that we have available. Councilmember Flaherty, I think you were next, and then Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, a point of information, actually, if it pleases the chair, I would like to hear from council staff, our council attorney rather, about the advisability of an advisory reasonable condition or one that states a preference, and just kind of obviously the legal impact would not be anything technical, but yeah, any thoughts there?
Well, I will say that the council typically doesn't adopt reasonable conditions to pick from preliminary plans. I think this came up because in talking with Mr. Grulich, we wanted to be sure that the correct preliminary plan got attached to the legislation, essentially. So I don't think there would be any sort of binding effect of expressing a preference, but I don't know that there would be any harm in it either. Mr. Grulich might want to weigh in on how that would impact things from here.
Yeah, so in general, with the petitioner's request, they're requesting to amend the preliminary plan and the district ordinance. So the preliminary plan just sets the approximate location and size of buildings and parking and driveway areas. So that's the usual level of detail that we get and approve at this level. You know, with the final plan, that's when we nail down, you know, some of these specifics, and we would deal with fire department review, parking requirements, the setback standards, the impervious surface standards. So we certainly understand the council's intent, and you know, staff is 100% in agreement that we would like to find any arrangement that limits and minimizes impervious surface coverage. But that's just not a level of detail that we would get worked out at this stage typically. So with the preliminary plan, you know, like I said, they all show, you know, parking in the back and the central drive aisle. You know, that's the general configuration of the parking area that we're going to be working towards when we approve the final plan. So I don't know that it's necessarily necessary to have a condition that just says you prefer something. We prefer the same thing. You know, we want to try to accomplish that, but, you know, we'll just leave that to the council's discretion.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more comments? Okay, I do remember, I listened to the land use committee, and one of the discussions that intrigued me was getting permission from the parks department, I do believe, in order to create space or give permission for emergency vehicles or fire trucks to get around or something. And that just didn't sound right to me at the time. And until that's clear to me, this particular reasonable condition, when we vote, I won't be able to support that. But do we have any other comments from any other council? Was that Councilmember Piedmont Smith? Yes.
Did we put a motion on the table to withdraw the reasonable condition? I don't recall.
You did, but it had to been unanimously approved, and Councilmember Boland did not.
Well, but then that means we vote on it.
Yes.
Okay.
These are in final comments. We're about to, yes,
Love you
you're
too.
absolutely right.
We're about to vote on withdrawing the reasonable condition, correct?
That was not my understanding. My understanding is that it can be withdrawn with unanimous consent. Councilmember Boland said no, so that removed that option. What I am moving to, if I am correct now, is to vote on this reasonable condition number 8 as it has been presented. Is that correct, Councilmember Flaherty?
That's my understanding as well, yes. Thank
you. Do we have any other final comments? Seeing none. I'm sorry, City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes.
Excuse me, Council, just before you get started with that. Mr. Lucas?
Yes.
Are you there?
Yes.
Actually, okay, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just had a question for you, but I'm not so sure it's proper at this point in time. Okay, well, clerk, please.
Mr. President, could you elaborate? We're voting on the reasonable condition itself or the withdrawal of the reasonable condition?
Oh, we're voting on the reasonable condition itself.
Okay, all right.
That is my understanding. Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Okay, Councilmember Rallo.
No.
Volan.
We're voting on the reasonable condition, not on its withdrawal.
Yes.
Yes.
Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Scambalori.
No.
Sims.
No.
Flaherty.
No.
Piedmont Smith.
No.
Smith.
No.
And Sandberg.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Reasonable condition. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Reasonable condition number 8 on ordinance 2107 fails 2-5. I'm sorry, 2-6. 2-6. Seven. Yeah, I'm trying to keep my numbers here. Thank you. Fails 2-7. So we are now ready for council comments on ordinance 21-07 as or with its reasonable conditions. Councilmember Volan.
Mr. President, I have some questions for the project as a whole. May I ask?
That can come in comment, council comment here in just a second, if I'm not mistaken.
Don't we normally have questions, then public, and then comment?
Yes, as soon as we enter. Yes, we do. So he said he had comments. Do you have a question, Councilmember Volan?
Yes, I have questions.
Okay, thank you. And I thought I heard comments. What I thought I heard you say. Go ahead.
This is for the petitioners. First of all, will the buildings be sprinkled?
I'll answer that. So the building code, and this question comes up all the time, in any multifamily building, so the buildings 7 and 1 and 2 will be sprinkled, especially because they have parking under the lower level, so there'll be 2-hour separations and all that. The townhomes are not required to be sprinkled. So that's a question that has come up, and that may or may not come into the dialogue with Mr. Clapp. If we had a residential type sprinkler system in those buildings, would that affect the fire turnaround? Certainly sprinkler systems save lives. They may not save buildings, but they certainly save lives. So we haven't gotten that far on building code review, but the townhomes will be the only ones that may or may not be sprinkled. They're not required to by code.
Well, that's a very helpful answer, and I appreciate that the multifamily buildings will be sprinkled. But when the chief pointed out that, there's only one access point for the townhomes, and they're from the west side of the building, and he said that if the building is unstable in the middle and they have to reach the east side of the building, that's why they might need an aerial truck. It seems to me that because of the limited vehicle access to this project, because it's hard on the park, that it really should dictate sprinkling in the townhomes too. What do you say to that?
I don't disagree with you. Again, it's for the townhomes. One of the aspects that we like the townhomes. First off, townhomes have a 2-hour or 2 1-hour separation walls between them, so fires don't spread. But the other part is that the townhomes were an affordable way to do home ownership on this site. So if we add sprinkler systems, we're adding quite a bit of cost to those buildings. That's the only thing I would say to that. I think, again, it's certainly something. We had a discussion here today about, would there be fire hydrants along this drive? Would that help for quicker access and allow them to run hoses to parts of the building as well and not have to rely on a truck? So I think there's a combination of things that we need to work out with the fire department. I don't disagree on the addition of sprinkler systems. I think there's a cost associated with it that might add to the cost of the townhomes.
I mean, if there were hydrants on the east side of the project between the trail and the buildings, maybe that would be sufficient and less expensive. I don't know.
Yeah, again, we were just asking if there was a water line there. But yeah, all very good points, and part of a discussion that it's been a little difficult with trying to work out what the code actually says and what people actually want and how we can manage all of this as far as fire department access. In the end, the reality is that the fire official, I believe, kind of gets the say on how they can access it and what they need to access it and what they'd like us to provide. If we found that adding sprinkler systems would allow us a little bit of leeway on some things, I think you'd see sprinkler systems in those townhomes. But again, it's just going to add to the cost of the townhomes. And again, we don't know what those numbers are, but I certainly know what a sprinkler system costs, and it's not cheap.
Okay. The other question I have is about the outdoor parking spaces. First of all, assuming that angled parking spaces are the order of the day, would you, the petitioner, have a problem with back-in angled parking since you have the dual drive lanes and the turnaround?
No, I think, you know, it's been discussed before. It's something I'd like to see. I know the city has looked at it on several projects for city streets, and this is the lower traffic, slower traffic. And so it might be a good place to give it a try and see how it works.
Especially for people on the west side of the building who can empty their cars onto the sidewalk instead of having to walk around it, right? The other question is...
Councilmember Boland.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we'll come back to you. Does anyone else? Okay. I'm sorry, if that's okay.
That's fine.
That was rapid fire questions. So sure. Council members have any other questions of the petitioners or Councilmember Scambler?
Yes, thank you. This is partly a content question and partly a process question. So perhaps Mr. Grulich or Mr. Bruce could speak to it. One of my takeaways from the Land Use Committee meeting were the comments from the owner of the northernmost portion of the warehouse, who seemed to have some valid concerns about information that we don't yet have in terms of shared aspects of the building, the 2/3 that would come down versus the 1/3 that would remain. I guess my questions are, at what point are those questions likely to have answers? And then at that point, what mechanisms are available to that owner to object if answers are not satisfactory, or how would that process play out, I guess is my question.
So that specificity would be worked out with the building permit. So the fire department would have to sign off on that building permit before it is issued. So the building department and the fire department would both make sure structurally and from a fire safety perspective that both buildings meet all applicable codes. So that's something they'd work out as they're designing the buildings and getting the building permit. All those details would have to be resolved at that point.
Is all of that a fire department? I'm sorry, may I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
Is all of that a fire department question? Because if I remember correctly, some of those questions had to do with potential damage to the northernmost part of the warehouse, for example, and that doesn't seem to me to be.
So those are, it kind of touches on three things here: the fire code, building code, and then any damages to the building. That's honestly, that's not something that we would pursue. That is something that is a matter between two private property owners. So that would be a question for their legal departments.
Okay, and I know we have public comment coming up. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Scambler. Any other council members have any other comments? Okay, seeing none, Councilmember Rollo.
Are you saying comment or question?
We are at questions. Then we're going to public comment. Thank you.
Then I will.
Thank you, Councilmember Volan.
Thank you. I'm going to share screen and ask the petitioner to look at this.
Well, thank you. No, you'll be allowed to do that. I want to check with parliamentarian. We are now past 10:30. So when he gets done with his presentation, then remind me what our process is after that, if you will. Please go ahead, Councilmember Volan.
I just wanted to show this picture to the petitioner.
That's fine. Go. No, that's fine.
An example of grassy, permeable parking spaces. I don't suppose you have any problem with this sort of thing in principle. Do you expect this to be more expensive than a simple asphalt paving of parking spaces? This is something recommended by the fire chief, by the way.
This is Jeff Daniel. The permeable pavers or the grass paving strips that you see there are many times more expensive than asphalt.
Okay.
You have to prep a bed. You have to buy the, in this case, they're a polyethylene or plastic extruded grid, and then you have to you put the seed in. And then, if I recall correctly, there's also under drains underneath that carry the water away. We've done some things like this, and I would say it's, I hate to say exact, it's probably 2 or 3 or more times more expensive than asphalt.
How about permeable pavers? Are those substantially the same cost as this, or are they less?
Or they're more like $28 a square foot. Was the last time I priced it out. And the other thing is that the UDO does not allow us to count permeable pavers towards impervious surface area.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you. Any further questions from council? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment on ordinance 21-07 as it has been amended or affected by reasonable conditions. You can please use the raise hand function in Zoom or contact your meeting host through chat. And Mr. Lucas, I think I see 3 hands raised.
Yes, first up is, I'm going to assume Elizabeth Cox Ash, who should now be able to unmute.
Hello.
Hello, are you there? Hello.
This is Elizabeth Cox Ash. I'm once again speaking for the neighborhood. This project is far too dense for this area. I have already stated about the hillside and by South Madison and the fact that you don't have additional parking. I don't care if it's angled or whatever surface it is. You just don't have enough space for this sort of addition to the neighborhood. What I think is interesting is in Saturday's home edition, there was a price of a house off of South Fairfax that was $1.5 million. I don't know what these townhomes are going to sell for, but this density is pushed into a core neighborhood where there are poor people who are buying homes in this area. This addition is 3.7 acres with probably 300, of course, the data changes every day because Doug Bruce changes it every day, of bedrooms in this addition. Unknown how many parking spaces for all those bedrooms. The ad I saw in Saturday's edition was 7.5 acres with a mansion of like 4.5, four bedroom, like 3 or 4 bath houses on 7.5 acres. Folks, this is rich versus poor. Who can afford $1.5 million house but a rich person? Somebody who makes more than what anything that I could have ever made in my entire life in banking. So therefore, the rich always mingle with the politicians, and the politicians always court the rich. So let's think about this. If we allow this to happen, we've opened the corral and allowed the horses out. By allowing this addition to happen, it doesn't matter what's going to happen because Tom Brennan is going to sell this and he's going to make his profit because this is more valuable property to sell with this allowing the amendments and allowing this PUD to be amended. And a lot of things can happen with a PUD. It's almost like making an agreement with the devil because a PUD allows a whole lot more to happen in the area. So think about it. when you vote. I know you're going to vote for it because you think you're going to get affordable housing. But it doesn't matter. Tom Brennan's going to get his price. He's going to walk out of the deal a happy man because he will have gotten what his speculated price was. And we will have to deal with a different person. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Who do we have next, Mr. Lucas?
Next up is Michael McBride, who should be unmuted.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for your time this evening. I represent Storage Express and Jefferson Shreve. We've heard a few comments regarding my client's concerns about this proposed petition and then the preliminary plans that support the proposed petition. Specifically with the preliminary plans, we've touched upon some of my client's concerns this evening, which were first stated to planning and then at the last two land use committee meetings. And I thank council members that were at the land use committee meetings as well for listening to those concerns. The first concern that we've touched upon a little is the potential damage to my client's building during the demolition. And there's an understanding that these are preliminary plans, but the council members are making their decision this evening based on these preliminary plans. And these preliminary plans are much more detailed than other preliminary plans that would normally be considered. But despite the concerns that my client has raised about the demolition, his answers over the last few months his questions over the last few months have still not been answered. My client was the general contractor for the build out for his building, and he has legitimate concerns with that knowledge about the feasibility of demolishing 2/3 of this building and leaving the remaining 1/3 based on the structure of the walls, potentials for shared utilities, pipes, electricity, and we have not seen any structural engineer report at this point showing exactly what would be done. Now it would seem if we're basing on having a structure that is going to demolish, 2/3 of the building and having these 7 additional buildings built, now would seem to be the time to make sure this can be done and what it entails. And we wish to have those answers. There are other answers that are a little bit more particular with the demolition. What damage will it cause? Will it displace the storage tenants on the south side of the building if the wall is not properly dealt with? And what if it can't have any consequence but to affect those storage units? And how is that going to be handled? There's also another issue about a possessory right to surface parking currently where Building 7 is supposed to be built. My client currently has surface parking, a lease there for many, many more years, 20 spaces. And the current preliminary plans do not address very specific issues about what are going to happen to those spaces and what's being proposed. It's our understanding that my client may get some spaces within Building 7, but that would be 20 of the 84 spaces, which is about 25% of what's currently being proposed for the entire building then. And how does that fit in with the parking requirements for the occupants and the residents in these structures? Moreover, will they be just as accessible to my client's building as they currently are, which would be a requirement of the lease and subject to his approval? And so we're not certain currently, without an agreement on those spaces, whether Building 7 could even proceed with construction at this point, given the possessory right my client has. There are a couple other things that were of concern, and one of them would be that we realized that it came to mind this evening, which would be the extension of the road behind the current proposed structure, and whether or not that's going to have any restrictions or requirements for future use and development on my client's property. And the plans that are unilaterally made by the current developer that at one point in time, this may connect out to Grimes. Currently, we have a building that has semi-use that goes back there. And if there's a need to connect to Grimes, there could be a substantial amount of traffic above and beyond semi-use at this point in time that's being proposed. And so any development at this point, I suppose, would need to be planned that would not be more than semi-use behind the structure. So there are concerns with my client's rights on the property, and for that reason, my client objects to the preliminary plans. I thank you for your time. I thank you for any consideration that's given by the council members to my client's concerns. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Who's next, Mr. Lucas?
Next up, I believe, is Chris Cockrum, who should now be able to unmute.
Mr. Cockerham, are you there?
Okay, how about now?
We hear you.
All right, beautiful. Good evening, council members. My name is Chris Cockrum with the FC Tucker Company, and I also serve on the Plan Commission. However, I did recuse from any discussion or vote on this project. I am a commercial real estate broker, and I've been working with Mr. Brennan for over 2 years looking for a potential buyer and or tenant for this building. During the marketing process, we received offers from developers looking to develop this property. The reason we did not accept these offers is because the developers wanted to extend an extended due diligence period for design, plus to go through the zoning process. And unfortunately, Mr. Brennan was led down this path once before with the developer, took over a year. He allowed his tenants to vacate the building, and then this developer failed to get approved. Mr. Brennan was left with an empty building with no income, and we did not want to repeat this process. As Mr. Brennan's real estate consultant, I explained all the options for this building. And my recommendation to Mr. Brennan was to utilize this building under the current permitted use under the Thompson PUD. Sell or lease this building as a 100,000 square foot warehouse. Let it be industrial use as it was originally built. This would be the easiest and most profitable path. Do not develop this property and do not go through the zoning process. As you know, Mr. Brennan did not take my advice. He wanted more for this property and the community. He wants this property to add value to McDowell Gardens neighborhood and to Switchyard Park. His goal is also to help add much needed housing inventory to our community. I feel Mr. Brennan and his architect, Mr. Doug Bruce, have listened to the city, the neighborhoods, and with their input have designed a great project. I ask that you vote to support this ordinance. I would also like to mention that when COVID hit our community, which includes our homeless individuals, families, and children, I was asked by several nonprofits to help find a safe location so these individuals could socially distance. Not an easy task to find a landlord open to helping our most vulnerable citizens. Mr. Brennan stepped up, opened up his building to help our community by leasing space at a very reduced rate to Beacon's Friends Place, as well as the winter shelter. And I would just like to publicly thank Mr. Brennan for his openness and generosity. And again, I feel Mr. Brennan and Mr. Bruce have designed a great project, and I ask that you vote to support this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Do we have anyone else, Mr. Lucas?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll now go to council for final comment. Do we have any?
Mr.
Okay,
you froze a bit.
Councilmember, pardon?
You froze a bit there for a second.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you very much. This development is just down the street from me, and it is in the heart of McDowell Gardens, as has been said, and in District 5. I think, first of all, I'd like to address some things that a member of the public said during her comments. Ms. Elizabeth Cox-Ash, who's one of my neighbors. Hello, Liz. I wanted to just first of all say I attended the last 2 McDowell Neighborhood Association meetings, and we talked about this project. And there was no vote taken by the neighborhood against it. So I just wanted to clarify that when Ms. Cox-Ash said she was speaking for the neighborhood. It wasn't like an official speaking on behalf of the neighborhood association. Also, I do want to emphasize that Ms. Cox-Ash said that we think we're getting affordable housing, but maybe we won't. Actually, we are requiring that there be affordable housing as a part of this petition, and that will be a requirement regardless of who owns the property in the future if Mr. Brennan would decide to sell it. I really do think that this is a great project for affordable housing. We will get 15% of the units at a cost point that is affordable for people making 110% of area median income. And that's a great benefit. Aside from that, we need housing of all kinds in Bloomington. And the market rate housing, I think, also adds value. The impacts to the neighbors directly to the west, I think, will not be negative. Currently, they have a warehouse right behind them, which is close to their back property line. And in the future, they'll have a buffer yard, a drive, and in the latest version, 85 feet before there's an actual building behind them. So I think actually this will be an improvement. And I have to say, having attended the neighborhood meetings, I have not heard negative comments after I explained the distance. I have not heard negative comments from the neighbors who live directly on Madison. I also think this is a great location for more housing because it is in a place where you don't have to be dependent on a car to get to where you work or live, or work or play or do your shopping. It is in a location where a car can be shared among family members and not a vital part of your everyday life. And that's important given our goals for sustainability in our transportation plan. And the bottom line is they're replacing a 95% impermeable surface parcel of land that contains an ugly warehouse with a quality LEED certified green building development. I think it is an improvement. I think it's unfortunate they can't meet the 60% of the mixed medium income as in the UDO as the maximum impermeable surface, but I think they've already finagled more impermeable surface, or I'm sorry, more permeable surface than originally that was presented to the Plan Commission. So I think they've done all they can, and it's still going to be a heck of a lot better than what's there now as far as the permeable surface goes. And it'll be, I think, a good showcase for green building in a residential development here in Bloomington. Addressing what Mr. Mcbride has said at a couple of meetings, the legal issues are something that is not our purview, really. And if there are legal issues after, if this is approved tonight and the plan moves ahead, there's certainly legal recourse and engineering reports that will need to be done. And I think that's not really our purview here. So I leave that to the lawyers later on. So in sum, I think this is a really great project, and I look forward to having more neighbors in my hood. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Piedmont-Smith. Councilmember Rallo.
Yes, I think that this is an excellent development. I think it's actually a precedent-setting redevelopment, and clearly this is a prime location beside the trail. And as Councilmember Piedmont-Smith already elaborated. It meets multiple criteria for being an exceptional project. It's sort of a setting of the bar example in my mind of what to see in redevelopment petitions. And so needless to say, I'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other final comments from council members? Councilmember Flaherty.
Sure, just briefly, I shared most of my, I guess, more extensive thoughts at the second land use committee, so I won't go into that type of length here, but I did want to thank the petitioners and staff very much for all their work over several meetings on the variety of issues at hand. I really appreciate their willingness to work to address some of the remaining concerns around impervious surface and the context of the building and some things like that. So very much appreciate it. There's a lot of great things to like about this project. And just a note on affordability too, obviously the deed restricted affordable housing is incredibly important, but Mr. Brennan also noted, or I think it was Mr. Bruce actually noted a few times correctly that attached housing is generally a more affordable type of housing. Townhomes are a more affordable type of housing. That's borne out empirically, both locally here in Bloomington, as well as in national data. You know, so it's nice that we have that option for folks, and in particular, not just rental housing in this context, but also the opportunities for owner-occupied housing in a smaller scale attached way that's both more sustainable and generally a more affordable housing type. So I appreciate that we'll be adding some of that type of stock in particular to our infill development here in Bloomington. Thanks.
Thank you. Further final comments from council members? Okay, seeing none. Councilmember Volan.
Yeah, I just want to say that I generally agree with my colleagues and Mr. Cockrum that the petitioner's done a decent job with this proposal. We do need more housing supply. There will be affordable housing throughout this project. In the past week, excuse me, in the past week alone, since the second land use committee, the petitioner has striven to meet the challenge laid down by the Environmental Commission to not approve a project of greater than 60% impervious surface. When it was presented to the land use committee, it was at 80%. But the reason that we were all sort of competing over the question of where the roundabout would go and the angle of the parking is that with their new design, angled parking gained at least 1,000 square feet of green space. It's actually more than that. The new impervious surface calculation that both the petitioner and I have come up with is below 70%. If we can reduce the width of the drive lane and the roundabout alone from 27 feet to 12 feet, which may not be possible, but if we can do that, it would gain another 2,400 square feet. That'd be another percentage and a half of green space. Now the project is approaching 65, 67%. And, you know, like, while we could have striven for, demanded something more, I think this is a good compromise. This project has been improved by the process. I think Mr. Shreve's concerns are serious ones. I think that the petitioner can address them because I'm sure they're not going to build all 7 buildings at once. For example, the very turnaround we were just talking about could be built first and used as a parking lot temporarily while the other buildings go up. I am confident that a building that has been assembled can be disassembled if it's done properly. I imagine that the petitioner has every incentive to not disassemble it poorly. So I'm confident that those issues of the neighbor to the north can be addressed. So in general, I want to say that I'm supportive of this too, and I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other final comments from council members? Okay, seeing none, are we ready for the question? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll for ordinance 21-07 as amended?
Yes, Councilmember Volan?
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Scambaluri?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
And Rollo?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. And ordinance 2107, 21-07 as amended is adopted 9-0. We will now go to additional public comment. I would like to remind everyone that we normally set aside 25 minutes for this purpose. I would like for anyone that wishes to have public comment on anything that's not on the agenda to please indicate by using your raised hand on the Zoom function. I'm sorry, raised hand in the Zoom function, or send us a message chat to your meeting host. We're not hear anyone, but we're getting late in the evening and we will count hands to determine the length of time for public comment. So, Mr. Lucas, do you see anyone in interest?
No, I don't at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And seeing none, we are now at council schedule. Does staff have anything to offer, a suggestion regarding the council schedule?
Just a few reminders. There is a work session coming up this Friday where council members will be able to hear about legislation that's going to be coming to you all in the next couple of legislative cycles. One such item is a Title 15 ordinance that would amend various ticketing and towing procedures in Title 15 of our code. And then the other 10 items are all related to the UDO. And I'm sure you all have been following along with what's been going on with the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission wrapped up its work on UDO related items this past Monday and has certified, I believe, either 8 or 9 out of the 10 proposals that will be headed your way. So the work session this Friday could present an opportunity to get a brief preview. There's 10 ordinances in total, so I think staff would be prepared to provide a very general overview of the package of changes headed your way. And it might also provide an opportunity to discuss the schedule for taking those items up. Councilmember Sims has been thinking through how those items might come to council and how the council meetings to consider those items should be scheduled. At the moment, because there are no new items of legislation that were introduced tonight that would be ready for a committee discussion next week, I believe Councilmember Sims is looking at a special session next Wednesday in order to introduce all 10 items of legislation, and then looking at a committee of the whole that same evening to begin discussing at least an initial discussion of the proposals that have been certified to the council. I don't believe that would include a discussion of the zoning map change or the amendment having to do with plexes. So if any members of the public are listening in for when that might happen, it would not be next week. But again, I think he's looking at a special session next Wednesday, followed by a committee of the whole to begin discussing the other, as many of the other 8 proposals as you might be able to get to. So I know it's late tonight, so I would suggest perhaps a more detailed explanation could be given at the work session on Friday. But I wanted to put both of those meetings on your radar. I assume members would be interested in the Friday work session. So unless there's any interest to cancel that, staff will be prepared to attend and present on both the UDO related items and that one Title 15 ordinance that may be coming forward later in April. Happy to answer any questions now, but again, I know it's late.
Well, okay, colleagues, you've heard from our staff about this Friday. So by show of hands, how many are interested or plan to be there on Friday? It will be a party. You don't want to miss it. I'm just looking for smiles. It's getting late. Thank you. So we'll have work session noon Friday. And Mr. Lucas was absolutely correct with our staff and with the Vice President Scamboluri, as far as trying to plan all this. Detail, it'll become more obvious after next Wednesday, depending on how our schedule goes and what we can get through. So there will be plenty of time. We can still discuss other things. I'm looking for input, but it'll be really difficult right now to give for lack of a better term, a blow-by-blow schedule on how we'll get through this. So we'll start next Wednesday, try to do our due diligence and just basically do our jobs. So anything else, Mr. Lucas?
I don't believe so. It's been a long evening. Thank you for your work tonight on all the items of legislation. So thank you.
You're quite welcome. And I have 8 colleagues that I'm pretty proud of tonight as well. Is there any other business? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, been moved in second. Normally we'd say all in favor, but since we're on Zoom and we're not going to ask for a roll call, I'm just going to say good night. See you Friday, if not sooner. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.